Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. It is 11 a.m., in case you forgot to change your watches. Today, we're going to be talking about romance, sex, dating. Did they already do the Love and Marriage show? Similar indeed. Okay. Well, my name is Nancy Caruso. I'm your marine biologist, your naturalist on board the ship. And tomorrow is my last presentation at 9:30, which is going to be early. Most of my shows are at 11. So if you're up, please come. 9:30, called Life of a Marine Biologist. And we'll be in here about probably 9 o'clock, showing a little preview as well. So today I'm going to talk about what I do when I'm not here. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about what I do when I'm not here. I have lots of jobs. 2 years ago, I had 16 employers, because that's what marine biologists do. Lots of gigs. I call this the musicians of the science world. We do lots of jobs for lots of different organizations and people, and these are just some of my daily tasks, working underwater and guiding tours. I'm a boat captain. I'm a teacher. So I'll be talking all about that tomorrow. Really interesting stuff. And for anybody who has kids or grandkids that want to go into this field, I'll tell you all the perils involved. Okay, so today's presentation is titled Reef Romance. As I told you earlier, I actually have it called Sex in the Sea, but Carnival wouldn't let me say the word sex. So they're really not going to like this show, because this show is rated S for science. And if words like penis and eggs and sperm really put you off, you're not going to like this at all. So you might want to just head out, because there's going to be a lot of that in this show, all related to how the creatures of the ocean reproduce and their intimate lives therein. And this whole show is based on a book that I read about 3 years ago. It's called Sex in the Sea. It's by Mara Hart. And you can order this on Amazon. But I read the book and I said, oh, this would make a great presentation. So I often get inspired when I read books. I've got another one I'm working on about the evolution of whales, and another one on birds, based on books that I've read. So this one, if you like this topic, you can get this book. It's very fanciful, not scientific at all. As you can read, our intimate connection with sex-changing fish, romantic lobsters, kinky squid, and other salty erotica of the deep. So she's got a very good sense of humor, but it is all based on science. A very good book. So whether you know it or not, you care about sex in the sea. Hopefully all of you will leave here going, wow, I didn't know how intimately I was connected to all that sex going on out there around us. And we barely know anything about it, which is the case, right, with all of the world's oceans, all the topics in the oceans. We barely know anything about it. So everybody take a deep breath for me. And then thank the ocean, because 80% of our oxygen comes from the ocean, not trees. It comes from the ocean, from the algae, the single-celled animals, the microscopic organisms that grow out there in that water, provide us our life. So thank you, ocean. And we never think about this, but in order for us to live, we rely on the rapid reproduction of tiny algae and crustaceans to breathe and feed the fish that feed us. Very, very important. These bottom organisms here in the food web, the dinoflagellate, the diatoms, tiny microscopic organisms, feed everything up the food chain and allow us to breathe on this planet. We depend on the mass spawning of corals to create reefs that provide habitat for the millions of species that we use for medicine, food, and simple enjoyment. We rely on prolific procreation of oysters, clams, and other shellfish to filter and clean our coastal waters. You've all seen what happened in the Chesapeake Bay. I used to live near there. All the oysters are dead. The waters died too, because the oysters used to keep the waters clean. Now everybody's scrambling to replant oysters in the Chesapeake Bay. There's no more fish in there to eat. And whether it's finding the next cancer-fighting compound, feeding a growing population, or fueling economies, we depend on the extraordinary abundance of ocean life to sustain us, and that depends on lots and lots of sex. So there's some basics of ecology that I need to share with you today. Number one, all living things need fuel for energy. You agree with me on that one? We all need fuel in some form. Food delivers fuel, energy, in the form of calories. Okay, and we all expend, whether you're an ant or a tree or a human, we all expend energy in the form of calories. We burn calories, so therefore we must get calories. It's a one-way equation. Plants and animals generally expend energy for either reproduction, finding food, or fleeing from predators. That doesn't count us. But in general, nature, outside of humans, those are the three things that we're willing to put energy into. Not a whole lot of animals play. There's not enough energy in their food web for that. They can't expend extra energy to play. There's only a few animals in the animal kingdom that can afford that. And cats, when we think of cats, they actually play as practice for their food taking, right? So very basic energetics, food and fuel is very precious. We, this higher species, take all of that for granted because we can drive up to a brick building and somebody opens up a window and they'll hand us 3,000 calories. 3,000 calories are hard to come by in nature. Those grizzly bears up there, 900 pounds, are eating berries to get enough calories to have that body and to sleep through the winter. Berries, for heaven's sakes. You know how many berries you have to eat to sustain that metabolism? Wow. So this is something we take for granted. So think that in the back of your head. Reproduction takes fuel. It has a cost. If you're a mother, I don't have to tell you that. That baby took a lot out of you, right, to give birth. Some fuel is easy to get. You simply open up a leaf, and the sun provides you with that fuel. Some fuel, it's hard to get. You ever think about how hard it is for a seal to find food? They live in waters you can't see through. And I don't know about you, if you've ever tried to catch a fish with your hands, that's difficult. Try catching it with your face. No hands. First, you have to find it in darkness and then chase it. I guarantee you, if you had to chase pizza around on deck 9 with your mouth, you wouldn't have gained as many pounds on this cruise. Some reproduction takes a lot of fuel, very expensive, like humans. A lot of mammals carry their young for 9 full months, and that young baby comes out pretty big and fatty. Took a lot of energy to get it that way. Some reproduction doesn't take as much energy. It's just eggs spewed out into the ocean and hope for the best. So we're going to talk about some of those things. Wasting fuel is expensive, energetically speaking. So most animals don't waste calories. That's why there's laws about approaching marine mammals. If you're out on a whale watching trip, you're not allowed to interrupt that whale's path to go get its food because it's taken a lot of calories to get there. You go cut him off to go take some pictures of him, you've just ruined its meal. Now it's got to go find a meal someplace else. So we stay away from animals. We don't want to ruin that. It took a lot of calories to get that. So daily living, of course, also has a cost. Just surviving, just laying in bed has a cost. You've got to eat calories so your body has something to burn. So eggs versus sperm. Just as in humans, sperm is produced in large quantities in nature. In most sea animals, the eggs are larger and fewer in numbers than the sperm. And it takes more energy to produce eggs, just like in humans. than sperm. Now, there's a couple of different options, actually, when it comes to having babies in the sea. You're either born as a fully functioning but smaller version of your parents, like this perch giving live birth here. I caught this fish, and it started spewing out its babies prematurely. Or you may be hatched from an egg as a fully formed version of your parents, just a little smaller. This is a shark egg. There he is hatching from his egg. This is a swell shark. You may have seen these at aquariums. They put them on display now, so you can see the development of a shark inside of its egg case. They have a yolk attached to them. When that yolk is all absorbed, the parents don't give it any care, but when that yolk is all absorbed, it comes out looking just like its parents, but smaller, and it's on its own to go find food and figure out how to live. Or you can hatch and develop as larvae, often planktonic, and often with multiple life stages. This is what we're going to talk about a lot about today. I've mentioned this a few times in my shows, but most of us don't realize that almost everything in the ocean starts off its life microscopically. So it's possible to, like I said, to get hit in the face with a wave, and you just got in your nose and your ears, all over your hair, baby pufferfish, baby blennies, shrimp, crabs, oysters, mussels. There's baby triggerfish, baby frogfish, all microscopic when they're born. And this is why every drop of water in the ocean is so important, because all that life is in there. That's why desalination plants are not a good idea if you're in places where there's a lot of life. Because you want to take that water and filter the salt out, guess what happens as well? All these organisms are getting filtered out too. There's no way to save them in our current technology. So this is an example of that. You all know those sand crabs that your kids like to catch down at the beach, right at the water's edge. They go digging in the sand, and they come up to the surface every time the wave goes out, and they dig back down every time the wave goes in. They do this all day long. They look like this. Well, when they're born, they're microscopic, and they look like this. That's the baby sand crab. It goes through multiple life stages, 6 of them actually, in order to turn into this sand crab that we all know. Look at that. That's so strange. And when they look like this, they're floating around in the plankton. Microscopic, can't see them. They're floating by us all day long today. Can't see them. So this is the other option of being born in the sea. And how's all this happen? And is it much different than humans? So think about this. Are ocean animals attracted to each other? Do they flirt with one another, court one another? Do the females look for a knight in shining armor that's going to whisk her away? Do the males look for the hottest chick on the reef when they're mating? How do you make sure your babies don't get eaten? Think about all this in human terms. These are things that humans take on, and I don't know if they're much different than us. So being attractive, fish look for colors, bright, flashy colors. Do we do that? Yeah. That's why women wear makeup, right? We have bright red lips. What about the size? Does the size matter? That's always the question, right? Deep tones. Are we attracted to deep tones? Yes. Physiologically, unconsciously, we are. Women like men with deep voices. Flashy fins. Women, do you like flashy fins? Like that flashy car when he brings it around? Yeah, we like those things. We like flashy jewelry too. Does he have a nice nest? A nice territory I might be able to make a home in? Yeah, fish do that. They look for that. So do we. Are they strong? Can that male win me a fight? Show me that he's the strongest on the reef. Do we look for that? You bet. All this is proven in the unconscious and the conscious mind in psychology. So we're not that different than fish, actually. Strategies for reproduction. These are all strategies that some of the fishes use in the ocean Courtship, definitely. They go out on dates. They court each other. Group spawns, orgies. Yeah, humans do that too. Nesting. Yep. You set up a house, have somebody come look at your pad, show that off for them. Monogamy, sure. Sex change, and then fight for your right to spawn. Yep. Males fighting over females. That's never ended. The ocean's a pretty big place to find a date. It can be taxing, requiring months of travel and weeks of preparation. Sometimes nothing more than a wink and a nod, and a pair of lovers are out together swimming. Some long-distance affairs, some ambush attacks. The strategies for finding and securing a mate in the sea are as diverse as the sea itself. So, mating strategy number 1. Ladies, you may have seen this before. It's called be annoying. This is a pufferfish, a porcupine puffer, and the male actually uses this strategy until the female gives up. He follows her around, he'll bite on her fins, he won't leave her alone. And finally, she just says, fine, let's get this over with. And again, when you're snorkeling, you can see these things happen if you know what you're looking for. I was telling people, when you go snorkeling in Hawaii, just lay still. You'll see porcupine puffers or pufferfish. A lot of the pufferfish do very elaborate mating rituals, and you'll see them doing these things underwater. The mandarin fish, they put on a dance. They show off their moves. Anybody ever had this happen to them? Saturday Night Fever, right? The mandarin fish, a gorgeous fish. It's only the size of a credit card, but a male finds a territory in which he sits prominently on top of a rock, scouting out females. When he sees one, and you can sit and watch this, I've done it, watch as he goes up into the top of the water column and comes back down doing this really elaborate dance, flashing his fins at her. And if she likes it, he wins. If she doesn't, she moves on to the next one to see if she likes his moves better. Singing. Anybody ever use that on a girl? Blue whales. Sound can travel 300 miles. They have deep, 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 deep tones. The deepest tones in the ocean. We can't hear them because they're outside of our range of audible hearing, but the females must love it. Sperm whales actually have the loudest biologically produced sound on Earth. We don't know why. Is it for stunning predators or attracting mates? Scientists have figured out that because their sounds are so loud, they carry for very long distances, and they can actually tell how big the male is by how many times it echoes inside of its long head. And they think females might be able to do the same thing. And then we all know about humpback whales, the chorus of the sea. Only the males sing. Isn't that romantic? They sing, and they only sing really in Hawaii, where they go to mate. They don't sing in Alaska. No reason to waste all that energy. So out of the water is a strategy too. This is probably a strategy to stay away from predators, because this fish aggregates, meaning millions of them come together to spawn. That's a good time for predators to come and eat them. So they actually take their bodies out of the water. This happens in Southern California. Beginning on the nights of the full and the new moons, spawning occurs after high tide and continues for several hours. As the waves break on the beach, the grunions swim as far up the slope as possible and lay their eggs in the sand. And males will fertilize as many female eggs as they possibly can. Now, this is probably the most romantic. This is the white-spotted pufferfish. And you can watch a few of these videos on YouTube because it takes hours and hours to accomplish this. But a male spotted pufferfish will find a nice spot in the sand, and he'll begin to construct this beautiful mandala shape. Gorgeous architecture here, right around where he'll sit, right in the center there, and wait for females to come by looking, deciding if they like the nest or not. No, not round enough, not high enough, Look at that. Beautiful. Then he bites her on the head and they go off and mate. Isn't that gorgeous? Tirelessly, he has the instinct to do this. The Nassau grouper, tasty fish, its mating strategy is aggregations. And this is really popular in the ocean. Most of these animals live alone, right? Humpback whales live alone. They go out and they forage all by themselves. So in order to mate, they have to have an innate instinct to go aggregate, for all of them to come together, or they'd never find each other in the ocean. And how they do that, we don't really know. But this one is pretty famous. These groupers, and it also increases genetic diversity. So you're not just mating with the same grouper that lives next to you on the reef down the road. It's a homebody fish. Like I said, they live solitary lives. But for some reason, I mean, you can go to the same spot on the coral reef and see that same grouper every single day in the same spot. It goes out and hunts at night around the reef, but comes back every time to the same spot. But as the days shorten and the sea temperature drops, something changes and they have the urge to swim. They travel hundreds of miles to engage in this massage orgy. It's a remarkable journey, and we really don't know how it happens. How do isolated individuals that barely stray more than the equivalent of a few blocks from the reef find an orgy on another island and find it in time, because the party only lasts 2 or 3 days every year. Millions of them show up. So scientists follow this by using acoustic transmitters, because the fish are talking to one another. And when they all get together, there's thousands and thousands of them on the reef. People who have seen it, I've seen videos of it, all of a sudden the fish change color. As you can see, that's different than this Nassau grouper. They change color, and they all swim to the surface of the water. The females release their eggs, the males release their sperm, and then they all go back home. It lasts for just a few minutes. In the Cayman Islands, the numbers swell to 4,000 fish. They spawn in an area with swift currents, so it whisks away their eggs and sperm and carries them all over the reefs. And then, of course, that's when the whale sharks come to eat the eggs of the Nassau grouper. So lots of adversity for these things once they are released. Whales, as I said, are great examples of aggregating species. The gray whale, which migrates to the Bering Sea in the summer to feed on amphipods, way off the coast of Russia and Alaska up here, travels 4,000 miles every single year, twice a year, down to the 3 lagoons in Baja California. This is where I take people to go visit the whales, where they mate and give birth. And they only do it there in those 3 lagoons. The humpback whales, same thing. They swim around alone in the oceans. There's different population of humpbacks in every part of the world's oceans. But over in North America, the ones that go from Alaska to Hawaii, they travel alone. So they all aggregate in Hawaii. They have a big orgy there. Females mate with numbers and numbers of males. The males are fighting with each other to compete. And then they go back to Alaska and start feeding again. Seals and sea lions, they do this too. They aggregate on the islands off of Southern California and around the world for mating. The males compete, show dominance. The dominant male gets the most number of females. He mates with all of them. Lots of genetic diversity. Sea turtles do the same thing. They aggregate because they're alone out there in the ocean too. They don't swim around in schools. They're out hunting on their own, so they come together one time a year to mate and lay their eggs. Hammerhead sharks are another one. They all get together. Lobsters too. Lobsters are fascinating. They aggregate. They go out into deep water for a portion of the year, and then they come into shallow water to reproduce. And that's when we're allowed to catch them usually, is when they're in the shallow water. Now, males get into pissing contests. Now, they have penises that face towards their faces. So they grapple with one another, kind of wrestle, and they pee on each other. And the one that wins, that scent starts getting recognized all over the reef. So he comes walking by, and the other lobsters are going, whoa, he's the guy. And the females go, yeah, he's the guy. So he finds a nice den that's big enough for 2 lobsters, and he goes in there and slaps one of his sperm packets on her carapace, and then she can reproduce whenever she wants to, fertilize her eggs. The lobsters molt, as we talked about yesterday. All the crustaceans molt their exoskeletons. And so she doesn't want to use that sperm. She's like, you know what? He wasn't that great. I think I could do better. She just molts off that sperm packet. She gets a new carapace, and then she'll open herself up to anybody else who'd like to try. The lobster life cycle is very complicated. For a very long time, we didn't know how to grow them. And Darden Corporation, the owners of Red Lobster Company, figured out, you know what? We spend a whole lot of money shipping water and lobsters over to Asia. Asia loves lobsters. And they said if we could figure out how to grow them without using so much, or grow them, we wouldn't have to ship them and spend so much money on shipping. So they put a lot of money, millions and millions and millions of dollars into figuring it out. And when they did, they found out that lobsters are cannibals, and you have to grow every one of them in a separate tank. So when they start off microscopically, that's a problem. Have them all in a separate tank. So they figured it out, but they found out this is really not logical, and it's not economical. So they're back to shipping again. This is a very interesting concept. Now, you can imagine lobsters finding a mate. But what about the tiny, tiny little things that we rely on for breathing and for our lives? These microscopic organisms, the copepod, probably the most important organism on the planet. The copepod, most of you probably never even heard of it. It's the bottom of the food chain, and everything relies on this guy being here, or the food chain would collapse. It's tiny, tiny, microscopic little shrimp, thousands of a millimeter. How do they find a mate in the ocean? You think it's hard for us. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack, but the haystack's Mount Everest. They're transparent even. There's 11,000 species of them that we know of. And it's, again, extremely important. Well, it turns out, and this is what got me to read the book. I read the first chapter, and this was in the first chapter, and I said, my God, this is a scuba diver in water. This is fresh water, and this is salt water. Isn't that weird? It's in a cave. Now, this happens in the ocean all the time. There's freshwater vents coming up out of the ocean. There's actually freshwater lakes in the bottom of the ocean. Can you imagine that? Freshwater lakes in the bottom of the ocean. Difficult to imagine. But where this water, this fresh water touches the salt water, is a halocline. That means there's a tiny microscopic layer where those two salinities meet. Turns out that's a superhighway for the copepods. They can cruise through there at fast speeds, leaving little scents behind them, and females can pick up on the scents of the males and vice versa. And it may last only a few seconds because this will mix. If you kick it up, right, that diver's going to kick it all up and mix the salt water with the fresh water. Another way they do it, if you're a diver, you're very familiar with this. As you descend into the ocean, it gets colder and colder and colder. Well, those layers of cold water and warm water stack on top of each other. So you might have 60-degree water with 50-degree water underneath it. And there's a very tiny, minuscule, microscopic line between those two temperatures of water that these animals can cruise through like a superhighway and find a mate. So anytime these convergence layers occur, apparently that's when the copepods are looking for a mate. They can smell the female's body 100 body lengths away. It's equal to smelling a girl's perfume atop a 6-story building and then tracking her down. This is a single female copepod seeking a single male copepod. Again, he cements a packet of sperm on her abdomen. She can decide to use it whenever she'd like. If she finds a better option, she doesn't have to use it at all. One of my favorite animals, this is the California state marine fish. It's called the Garibaldi. This is the adult version. This is the juvenile version. And this is its nest. So investing in survival is something that sea animals do. Sometimes they just release sperm, like the Nassau grouper, and eggs, and they're good luck. Hope you make it. The sperm have to actually find the eggs in the ocean, which is insane that it actually happens. But sometimes the nests are a better investment for survival. So the Garibaldi, which is a damselfish, creates nests very specifically. He'll go into an area, find a rock that's approximately 20 degrees on an angle. He'll clean off everything on the rock because nothing in nature is bare. So he'll clean off every single organism, every algae, every plant that's growing there. And then he'll only allow this red algae to grow on the reef in this little area. See this little red algae? Because it masks his eggs, which are reddish orange. So he'll farm this little patch. It's usually about a foot and a half wide. He'll farm this patch of algae, only letting that species of algae grow. Then he'll show it off to his female suitors that are coming by, again, looking, going, oh, no, that's not round enough. Your nest isn't big enough. Oh, that one's nice. She'll deposit her eggs on that nest. He'll go in and fertilize them, and then it's his job to watch the nest. And the fish, the damselfishes, all of them do this, will die protecting it. I've shown students this before. It's kind of mean, I guess, but I'll take a shell, I'll put it in the nest, and the Garibaldi will pick it up, swim it about 30 feet away, drop it, come back to the nest. You could put another shell in that nest. He'll pick it up, swim it 30 feet away. He'll do that all day long till he dies of starvation because you've kept him so busy keeping his nest clean. This instinct for survival of his offspring. I didn't kill him, by the way. Just did that a couple times. So Nemo is another one we're familiar with, right? Laid his eggs underneath the anemone. His dad, his mom. And these are little Nemo eggs, clownfish eggs. They're attached from one end. They have a yolk, egg sac inside. And the male, again, guards around the anemone. But there's a dominant female that sits in that anemone too. She's in charge. She'll bark out orders to the subservient males. Tom got this picture, my husband got this picture of a clownfish actually depositing eggs on the rock there. There's an ovipositor there, which I thought was pretty cool, underneath the anemone. Another way to invest in survival, not build a nest, hold your eggs in your mouth. There's a few species that do this. This is called a jawfish, and jawfish come in different sizes, as small as 2 inches and as large as about 2 feet. And the female will lay her eggs in the male's mouth. The male then, of course, can't eat anything until the eggs hatch, but they live down in the sand in a hole, and they just stick their heads out and watch what's going on around them. They usually have their mouth open so they can aerate the eggs, get fresh, clean salt water over them, lots of oxygen. And as they hatch, they just swim out of his mouth. But that's pretty good protection. They're not getting the eggs unless they eat him. And most people know the story of the seahorse. They're relatively monogamous, at least for one breeding season, where the female will deposit eggs into a pouch in the male's belly, like a kangaroo, kind of. The male will look pregnant, and he actually fertilizes them while they're inside of his belly. And when the larvae are ready to come out, little tiny, they're only probably about 2 millimeters long. When they're ready to come out, it looks like the male's going through contractions. Female humans get a little bit of joy out of this. They watch male seahorses giving birth, but he kind of pumps his belly, and the baby seahorses come floating out and float away in the currents, 2 millimeters long. Go try to make a living without getting eaten. Now, another strategy similar to humans is fighting for the right to mate. And these guys here, the bumphead parrotfish, are an endangered species. We thought they were all gone, actually, but we started to find them again. They're off the coast of Australia. And like the rams of the terrestrial world, these guys will bang heads, fight to see who's the strongest. So they've always got these beaten up foreheads, but it's a giant bone on their foreheads. And they go out, you can hear this underwater, these crashing of bones. They come at each other at 10 miles an hour and run into each other's heads to fight for dominance to be able to spawn. So, some other animals that fight for dominance and to be able to spawn. Humpback whales. You can see this in Hawaii in just a few months. Males will draw blood from one another, banging each other with their fins and their tails, and they'll be all scratched up, bleeding out there in the ocean. The elephant seals are very famous for banging their noses together for dominance, to have a harem of females. And sea otters, as cuddly as they may seem, are vicious weasels. The males will bite the face of the female, biting her nose off to get her to mate with him until finally she gives up. Sharks also are brutal with one another. The males will fight the females to try to get her to mate, show her that he's the one that she needs. So not only do males and males fight, but males will batter the females in order to get her to agree to mate. This is a female great white shark who's been battered by a male. They also do that with the females. Now here's some really interesting sex in the sea. First, we're going to talk about sequential hermaphrodites, where an animal develops as one sex first and then another. And this is when they change sex usually just one time in their lives, but I have a few friends that are working in a laboratory right now, and they're working with blennies, and they found that they can actually change back and forth from male to female. Very interesting. And the gonads of a sequential hermaphrodite possess the genetic information for both male and female reproductive organs, but they only have one at a time. So these aren't organisms born with male and female parts. They are only either male or female, but they can change back and forth. Very interesting. And it comes in handy, though, sometimes. Yes, Nemo is one of those species. So in a population of clownfish, and again, this is really easy to see if you sit and just watch a reef, watch the clownfish. There'll be one dominant female in an anemone, in one anemone. There'll be one non-dominant male who's a little smaller than the dominant female, and then these undifferentiated fish. They don't have male or female sex organs yet. So they're not born male or female. And the dominant female orders around everybody, tells them what to do. You, over there, flank that predator that's coming in. Everybody dive into the anemone now. There's something coming in after us. This is really interesting to watch. So Nemo was born an undifferentiated fish. And at some point, maybe was going to become a Nancy. Now, simultaneous hermaphrodites have both male and female organs at the same time. Roses have male and female organs at the same time. That means they can self-fertilize. They don't need a mate. How great is that? You just go, I want to make a baby. And there you go, you have a baby. This is a group of sea hares here with their spaghetti eggs. They make big nests out of eggs that look like spaghetti. And this is a flatworm over here. Flatworms are really interesting because they are all males, but they use their bifurcated penises to fence one another, and the loser has to become the female. This is one of my favorites. So many of you probably have seen this shell. It's called a slipper shell. And they like to live in the rocks of the intertidal area where the waves crash up on the beach. So they pile up on top of each other. And eggs, when they reproduce, eggs and sperm are dispersed into the plankton, and the larvae go through metamorphosis. And when the larvae are ready to settle, they have to find, think about this, they're microscopic, they have to find an area they can't see. They're using smells because everything in the ocean is about smells, chemicals. So they have to find an area where there's other slipper shells. And if a baby snail, this one that's settling, touches the bottom far away enough from other slipper shells, it rapidly matures into a female. But not to attract males, but to attract other juveniles who are not yet developed so that she can create a harem of males. And they stack up on top of her, 6 or 7, and they all unfurl their long extendable penises to fertilize the anchoring female on the bottom of the stack. So they live like this. Once the female on the bottom gets enough sperm, the male closest to the bottom turns into a female and takes advantage of the surplus of sperm because there's a whole lot of them on top. The second floor female also starts emitting pheromones to attract more juveniles, and so on and so on, and the stacking continues. Fascinating. Another strategy is life after death. So you give all you have for reproduction, and then you die. Because it's a lot of energy to reproduce. So squids and octopus are a great example of this. The males die right after mating. The females live long enough to care for their eggs. When their eggs start hatching, they also die. So here is a picture of an octopus den. She's kind of whitish in color. That's signifying that she's decaying, dying, not eating anymore. But these are her eggs here hanging from the top of her den. Very small, about the size of a rice grain, maybe half the size of a rice grain. And once they begin to hatch, she'll use her siphon here to blow all the larvae out into the ocean, and then they're on their own. They got to figure it out. Squid lay eggs in these tubes. There's hundreds of them in each one of these little white tubes here. They lay them on the bottom of the ocean all together. This is where our squid comes from. If you eat calamari, it doesn't take a good fisherman to catch calamari, because all the squid come together, and we know when they do it. And so all the squid boats go out to this one area where all the squid are laying eggs and mating, and it's amazing. If you're a diver, it's really like vertigo, because there's squid flying all over the place, all over around you. It's at night, and everything in the ocean comes to eat them. The dying squid and the newly laid egg cases. That's an amazing thing to witness. Salmon are another one. They give all they have for their offspring, right? They leave the calm waters in the glacier-fed rivers that they're born in because there's not enough food there for them. There's no life in those rivers. They go out to the Pacific and they feed for up to 5 years on all the food in the Pacific, makes their meat turn pink. They're eating lots of krill. And then they come back up to the streams where they were born with eggs and sperm. They actually change their morphology when they come into the rivers. So this is the same fish, by the way. This is what they look like in the ocean phase here. This is what a king salmon looks like in the ocean. And once it hits the river, it turns into that. Because it needs to look good for the females. So he gets this big hook on his face, turns red, and all the salmon do this, and they look different. Each species turns a different color and looks different. They all get teeth on them that are really big, so they can bite the females if they need to. This one, the coho salmon, gets this big hooked mouth, and they lay their eggs. The males come through as many as possible to fertilize the eggs, and then they die. This is all a slit open salmon. You can see all the eggs in there. She's got a lot of them. Some of them get eaten. Some of them return back to the earth and create soil for Alaska's rainforest. And this is a good one too. Deep sea anglerfish. How are you going to find a mate at 3,000 feet in the dark? The females dwarf the males, so they don't even look like the same species. But what happens is when a male finds a female, he bites into her body, fuses his body, his face, to her body. And whenever the female wants his sperm, she releases a chemical that says, all right, I'll take it. And he pumps it into her body. That little bump on her head, that's her husband there. That's on her abdomen there. So wherever he touches her, that's where he's going to attach, because he might not find her again. So he's going to stay attached to her for the rest of his life. And he just actually gets absorbed into her body. So, do we impact sex in the sea? Yep, you bet. Taking trophy fish. can decrease the number of large reproductive animals in the population. Overfishing makes it harder to find a mate. You know, those Nassau groupers we were talking about. Well, if you were a Cayman Island fisherman and you found out that there were 4,000 Nassau groupers out there spawning, and you knew you could make $8 a pound on Nassau grouper, you betcha you'd be out there with a net scooping them up. So that's a problem. Next year, there's only 1,000 Nassau groupers spawning. Fishing during spawning aggregations, no good. Raking the beaches. We've been trying for years to get California to stop raking the beaches because that's an important habitat for larvae, for our grunion, who come up and lay eggs in the sand. The sea turtle areas where sea turtles lay eggs, they're obviously not raking those beaches anymore. They've finally figured out not to do that. And hormones in the water. This has become a big thing because now we can study it. Wastewater treatment plants can't remove hormones, but polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, that come from our transformers, every time it rains, it's washing off of our land and into the ocean, are known to cause reproductive failure and harbor porpoises. Estrogen, from me, from you, is being released in agriculture, as we're giving estrogen to animals as well as humans taking birth control. Delayed spawning of English sole it causes, feminization of male mullets, sterility in ringed seals in the Arctic, and decreased number of eggs in North Atlantic cod. I know they started checking males and female fishes off of our coast where we discharge our wastewater. So all 90 million gallons a day gets discharged into the ocean from Orange County, California, just a small county of 3.5 million people. And they found out that the fish that live next to that pipe where we discharge are 53% female. Oops, that's not supposed to happen. But there's a lot of estrogen in the water now coming out. And then we talked about this already. Plastic breaks down over time into smaller and smaller pieces. These pieces are charged and can adhere to chemical pollutants. And that's how these things get into our food chain, because we eat from the bottom of the food chain up. That all makes it to us because we're a top predator. That's why they say don't eat a lot of tuna. Don't eat a lot of big predatory fish, because you're eating everything that's in the bottom of the food chain to the top. Right? You'll lose your memory if you eat too many predatory fish, too much mercury in it. So, how can you help? Demand U.S. seafood. Get our seafood from our American fishermen and our American fish farmers, unless you know where it came from and if you trust that source. I don't know about you, but there's no FDA, USDA, and EPA in Southeast Asia. I'm just saying. So I demand to know where my food comes from, and I demand that U.S. seafood be served to me. If it doesn't have a restaurant, I leave, or I don't order that food. Governmental control. This is already taking place in a lot of ways, but we have to keep adapting the more that we know. Size limits on fishes, protecting habitats. If we don't know where animals live when they're babies, how can we protect their habitats, right? We just found out that the giant sea bass lives in sand before it becomes an adult. We have fishing seasons to help. You can't take a female king crab from Alaska. If you've ever watched The Deadliest Catch, they throw them back, right? They only take the males. And they're not allowed to fish during spawning season when the females are carrying eggs. Because when she's carrying eggs and you rip her off the bottom of the ocean, she'd throw all her eggs away. So these things are put into place to help protect those animals. And then expanding our palate. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I grew up in Virginia, when we would eat fish, it was always flounder. We ate flounder every Friday for my whole entire childhood. Now we don't have any flounders left, right? So expanding your palate and trying different fish so we don't keep eating the same ones over and over again. We ran out of cod in the Atlantic too. All gone because we ate cod for so many years. Support U.S. aquaculture and stock enhancement. So a lot of states, if you buy a fishing license, some of that money goes to putting trout back in the streams. Believe it or not, there's been trout farms on the east coast of North America since 1850 that put trout back in your streams and rivers and lakes, because they don't occur naturally in all those places that you fish for trout in the United States. We've been putting them in there. And support marine protected areas, places where nobody can take anything so that that ecosystem can get healthy. not only does it protect the fish, but it gives scientists a place to study the natural behaviors and the natural flows of an ecosystem. We don't have that in many places. So being able to have places that are natural are good. And so we know better, and that's my saying Miss Maya Angelou gave me. So we have to do better. When you know better, you have to do better. So that's the good news. We're doing lots of things, protecting endangered species, growing corals and putting them back on the reefs, releasing, these are my students, releasing white sea bass back into the kelp forest, trying to restock them in our oceans. So that's a good thing. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to play a little game with you called Who's Your Daddy? Famous game show where I'm going to show you a species of larval form of the organism, and you're going to tell me what it is as an adult. This is really hard, but hopefully it's going to make you realize how precious every drop of water is in the ocean. So, can anybody guess what this is? Squid? Lobster? This is the larval form of a starfish. This is what they look like when they emit eggs and sperm into the water, and one egg happens to get fertilized. It goes through 6 different life stages. One of them looks like this before they turn into a starfish and settle down on the bottom. Remember, they have to find the bottom, find a place that's going to be suitable to live. There's the adult starfish. How about this one? I showed it to you yesterday. Ocean sunfish. That's right. Mola mola. That's right. It's 1 millimeter in size, and it grows 30,000 times that size as an adult, almost 3,000 pounds. What'd you say? Flounder, halibut. It is a flatfish. It's not a halibut, because I know what those look like. They have really big blue eyes. It's a flatfish. And their flatfishes are very difficult to tell apart even as adults. But there's soles, there's turbos, there's flounders, and there's halibuts. Now, the very interesting thing about flatfishes is, as you know, they lay on the bottom and they have 2 eyes on the top of their head, right? But when they're born, they actually have an eye on both sides of their head. And at some point during their metamorphosis, they go through several life stages as a microscopic organism. That eye migrates either to the left or to the right. And it becomes either a left-eyed flounder or a right-eyed flounder. Crazy. Is he a right-eyed flounder or a left-eyed flounder? You have to know which eye stayed put. He's a right-eyed flounder, that's right. How about that guy? I hear lobster, I hear crab. Those are good guesses. It's a blue crab. These are from the Atlantic. I grew up eating blue crabs from the Chesapeake Bay. Soft-shell blue crab sandwich is my favorite. And these have several different life stages. As I said, they go through different metamorphoses. This one has 7 or 8 stages just here within this zoea stage. So 7 or 8 different times it changes form. Like, think of a butterfly. It goes through these weird, it was a caterpillar, now it's a butterfly. That's how many times this thing changes. 7 or 8 just to get here. And then from the zoea phase, it becomes a megalops. This is still microscopic. And then settles out on the bottom and starts growing up as a juvenile blue crab. And it takes about 20 molts to get to the adult size that we're allowed to eat. How about that one? Looks like the Starship Enterprise. Flying fish? This is a tricky one. You'd never get it. It's a barnacle. Really. So barnacles have a tricky life stage because they live on a rock, but they have to release eggs. The eggs go way out to sea. How do they get back to the rock again? Nobody knows. But the barnacle has the longest body size to penis ratio of any, reverse that, penis to body size ratio of any organism on the planet. There's its different life stages. So there's the Nauplii, turns into this spaceship Enterprise. Then it attaches, looks like a little pea pod, and then grows into the barnacle. How about that one? This is my favorite. Yes, it's a jellyfish. So this is fascinating. If you remember learning about evergreens, pine trees, and in college, plants that have needles, they reproduce like this too. Ferns as well. They have spores, and then they have an alternation of generations. Well, jellyfish produce eggs and sperm, right? Then the eggs and sperm have to find each other, create a fertilized egg, goes through development like humans do, blastula stage here. Then you get a little planular larvae. It looks like a worm. And that worm crawls around on the bottom, finds a suitable spot, and grows into a flower. Looks like a flower. This is pretty small. You can see it with your eyes, but it's really small. It's like half the size of a grain of rice. And then that flower blooms, and every little flower that comes off of it floats away and becomes a jellyfish. So it has a sexual phase where eggs and sperm are involved, and then an asexual phase where it just buds off a new organism that's genetically identical to the one that it came off of. Fascinating. So remember, everything is connected. All that stuff, we need it because we breathe from the ocean. Go outside, take a deep breath because we're about to go to LA and you're not going to get this good air out there. Fill your lungs with it. Cough out all the old stuff. All right, I'm going to end today with another joke. I am horrible at telling jokes. I have to read the screen to even remember my punchline. So what did the fisherman say to the magician? If you know what this fish is, then it's a dead giveaway. The Australians would know. Pick a cod, any cod. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much. I'll see you at 9:30 tomorrow.